Hi everyone, Aaron Lelito here again to introduce Wild Roof Podcast number 3. There's a little bit of a new development with this audio feature I began a couple of months ago. It is now available on Apple Music or iTunes, whichever is the more current terminology for that podcast app, and also on Amazon Music. So if you use either of those apps or services, you can subscribe and you'll get a notification on whenever a new episode's released. And at this point, looking at about one at the beginning of every month. So this installment is to accompany our January issue number 6. And it's actually a little bit different than the previous 2 that I've done so far, which have been interviews. This one's more of a roundtable discussion format, and it was an idea I've had for a little bit. I wanted to try out, and this was the first opportunity I had to do that. So that's what you're about to hear in a couple of minutes. Just to set it up a little bit, in this episode, I'm talking to 2 other people. One of them, his name is Chris Vogt, and I've known Chris for quite a bit. We're colleagues at the same college as far as my teaching job, and I knew he would have a lot to offer in terms of some of the poetry and other writing we've published in this website. So over the years we've talked a lot about literature and a lot of other things, so I knew he would be a good choice to include in this discussion. And the other participant I have not known very long. Her name is Adrienne Rozells, and she's been helping as a reader since maybe around September, October, and has actually been a big help in how the review process goes, providing a good first or second step in the review process for some of the fiction and some of the poetry. Chris and Adrienne will be joining me in this discussion. And the way we set it up was basically we picked a couple of favorites, 1 or 2 favorite pieces that we published so far. The selection process is, in this case, 100% subjective. I kind of wanted to call it like a year-end review or something like that, but it's not in any way a best of, or we're not picking what we consider the best pieces that have been published. It was just to pick out a couple that we liked, either from a personal reason, personal connection, something that we just found interesting, or had something that we wanted to talk to each other about. So there's a handful of pieces that we cover, and if you were a contributor this year, I guess you're in the running. But just to name the pieces that we'll be talking about, and if you go to our website, wildroofjournal.com/podcast, you'll see links to all these pieces. So it's kind of an interactive listening experience. You can go and check out these pieces, a couple of poems, and a couple of visual pieces. So if you check those out first before listening, or during, or after, or whatever, it kind of gives you a little bit of a reference point for what we're discussing. So as the list goes, in no particular order as far as when they come up in the discussion, but the pieces that we covered are Samantha Kramer's Darkwood, that's from issue 5. Rosemary Bohm's poem, A Deluge by Any Other Name, also issue 5. Leilaj Curie, a visual and a poem piece called Shore, that's from issue 4. Todd Bartell, Garden Study, issue 5. Samantha Mallet, poems called Geography of Doubt and Property, back to issue 1 for that one. And Catherine Lecomte's Mad Girl's Love Song, and that was from issue 5 also. I just wanted to thank those particular contributors for sharing their work with us, and obviously we enjoyed it, and we enjoyed discussing it a little bit here. Obviously, there's many other great pieces that we've published over the past 5 issues. So perhaps we'll have more of these roundtable discussions, and we'll be able to pick out some more of those excellent pieces and talk about those in a little more depth as well. Really, our approach here was just to kind of use these as a little bit of a starting point to throw it back and forth, see what each other think about the pieces, what did we like about them, what drew us in as readers, and just kind of what we enjoyed about it. So I didn't want to make it anything as far as formal or academic sounding. Just a few people who enjoy this type of thing, whether it's the poetry side or visual art. Just wanted to get a little bit more into these pieces and consider them in a little bit of a different light. At this point, it seems like a good time to jump right into the discussion. So I hope you enjoy it as much as the three of us did. Thanks for listening, everybody. My name is Aaron Lelito. I'm the main editor at Wild Roof Journal. So this would be the third installment of these audio interviews, discussions. And if you're new to us, there'll be 2 other ones. They're more interview style, so you can go listen back to those.
My name is Chris Vogt. I teach at Erie Community College. I teach English, writing, and some literature. It's been at least 10 years since I've published anything, but I'm still struggling and interested and trying to stick with it as much as possible. And thank goodness there's places like this to talk about it and get back into literature.
Thanks. And Adrienne?
Hi, I'm Adrienne Rozells. I graduated this past spring from Oberlin College with a degree in creative writing, and I am a reader for Wild Roof, so I do some initial readings and pass things along to the main editors. And I've been published like in on-campus lit mags, things like that, but I'm kind of just striking out into the greater literary world, and I think that places like Wild Roof and opportunities to read so widely from different authors and creators have been really exciting for me and make me hopeful about putting stuff out there.
Adrienne, I know what you selected. Chris, I called you the wild card because I don't know what you selected.
Yep, it took me a while, but I was able to eventually narrow it down to a top spot with 2 runners up.
Okay, nice. So, we'll kind of see what we cover and, see what we like. So, we'll get started. Who wants to throw one out there, and we'll see how it goes.
Adrienne, sounds like you had some advance notice. If you want to kind of set the tone. I'll throw you under the bus there.
Okay, well, I chose 2. Maybe we can start with a poem. So I chose Darkwood by Samantha Kramer, which is in Gallery 1 of issue 5. And do you want it read aloud, or do you just want to talk about it?
I'll actually post whatever we talk about. I'll post it to the website, so people will be able to see it too. And there's some visual pieces that'll be on the website as well. So that's a great one. That was one I was eyeing up too, and one that struck me a little bit as I was going through these issues again. So what did you like about Darkwood?
I think this one just caught me pretty quickly. The opening line, even. I like how the stanza breaks so sharply, and it just made me want to read more and find out what was coming up. I think that this piece does a really interesting job of sort of blending human life just into nature. Like, for example, the line, "My thorn brush hair," I thought was really cool, and sort of just showing these sort of different wild elements within the narrator's life and like whoever they're talking to. And I think, but my favorite thing about this piece was just kind of how there are words that are combined that aren't real words and you usually wouldn't see put together like that. Like, edge glow or like gentle bone hands. I just thought these sort of invented adjectives were really, really cool. And they reminded me of E.E. Cummings a little bit and how he plays with that sometimes. And I just thought it had a really beautiful sound.
Yeah, the word usages are unusual, like you mentioned. There's words that are put together without a space. And one of the things that struck me about it too is it has this like almost a fairy tale kind of a tone,
Mm-hmm.
like it's like a dark wood, um, like a black forest idea, and has this kind of like a little bit more of like a fantastical element to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think like it has this fantastical feeling, but also a lot of callbacks to like Greek mythology. And so I think that was sort of an interesting way to, I mean, like it's playing with something that's so old, but then kind of retelling it in like a more modern fairy tale feeling way. And like almost speaking to the reader with the italicized bits. Like they have a totally different tone. I felt like they were talking to me more. And I wasn't expecting something that was like calling back to mythology to like interact with me as a reader so much.
Right. Yeah, those lines that are isolated in
Mm-hmm.
italics. Yeah, those. Yeah, that is right. It does shift the tone a little bit. It's a little more, I guess, it's conversational in a way
Yeah,
when there's a question.
yeah, exactly.
I'm a sucker for poems that seem like they're able to engage you like that without being overly formal or kind of deliberately self-aware. Crafty is an unfair word for it. And I'm also a sucker for what I call punchline endings. I'll bring this up when I talk about my piece, but I thought the ending here, "Feed me pomegranate with uncalloused fingers of unmade and famished love, let me eat." That feels like a conclusion. It gives me that kind of a little bit of surprise, but also maybe a little wit, possibly humor. Even I've only been through this poem once, but I felt like it wasn't as kind of darkly self-serious that some poems like this can often succumb to.
That's good too. Yeah, I mean, yeah, not to play on the title too much, but yeah, there is a darkness there. I mean, yeah, you read it through there's some dark imagery. But yeah, there is a I guess maybe that is the fairy tale element. There's a lightness to it, and
Yeah.
even a little bit of humor.
I guess I was curious because when I was reading this, I couldn't quite decide like what tone I thought it was. Like, there's definitely some darkness to it, but then part of me almost felt like it was like a hopeful, there could be a hopeful reading or like a romantic reading, and I couldn't quite decide what I thought was going on. So I'm curious how you guys felt about that.
I agree that the italics, kind of talking to the reader directly, gives me that sense of maybe, if not quite playfulness, but then at least accessibility. And of course, I always like to read poems as potentially romantic. So, tell me what is sweetness, or be gentle with me, scans for me as possibly with some romantic undertones, even if there's only one person involved.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think. Well, even just I was looking at the question there too. If I tore into your flesh, would you bleed light?
Mm.
So that's, I mean, you get the light and the dark kind of playing in each other there. Also, yeah. So I think that's definitely built into the poem. And like you said, Chris, it's not doesn't feel overwrought. I guess in the crafty sense, it kind of feels like a very naturally has a very natural kind of flow to it. I think, even though it shifts in tone a little bit between the stanzas and the italic lines in italics.
Do either of you know? I'm going to mispronounce the name. Evan Boland or Evan Boland.
No.
So she's interesting. She's probably in her 80s now, but she has a few poems that show up in anthologies for school frequently. And the most famous one is Anorexic, which is a play on anorexia, but it also has this kind of biblical undertone of kind of cleansing yourself or
Mm.
starving yourself to reach some kind of purity. And then she kind of ends with a romantic subplot where it's almost cannibalistic in its imagery, and I wondered if you've got a little cannibalism vibe from this.
I'm sure it is there too. Yeah, it did cross my mind too. Yeah, that is. I'm not familiar with the poet you mentioned, but I'll have to Look her up.
She's interesting because I actually got to see her live, and totally different reading when she reads out loud. You get a kind of a sense of mischief that you might not get if you were just reading it off the page.
Nice. Yeah. So all right, we'll move on to the next one, and we'll circle back to your other pick in a little bit.
Okay.
So I guess Chris, we'll await your first selection.
So the first thing I'd say is going through this many poems at this level of quality, I was embarrassed and ashamed at how little of this I've been doing. So in terms of my own background, went to college with a writing or English major, had a double major in psychology, and was putting stuff out there, right? So I have a show and tell here. This is the 2006 Poets Market. So this is what I was using to try to find publications like this to publish my own stuff. And I was wondering, I'll come back to this as a question for the two of you. Do you notice that there's kind of an American, and I don't mean this to sound pejorative, but an MFA style, like a certain style that is consistent among MFA students? Because the pattern that I noticed was all three that I really liked. Here are the two runners up. It was Not Their Prerogative Solely by Jerome Berglund, which I thought was very nice. Starts with kind of a Plato's cave analogy, but then also gets kind of playful. Stella Hayes, The Long Drive, might be my favorite, but I didn't know if I had enough to talk about it, except that it's just really luscious, and that was the one that transported me to the scene the most. And then the one that I actually chose, that I think is the most interesting and maybe my favorite, competitive, is Rosemary Boehm's A Deluge by Any Other Name. So that's the one I focused on, and I realized all three of them were either not born in America, or they were dual citizenship. They came from two different countries. So that made me start to wonder if I'm recognizing an MFA style, which again, I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on. So this is my favorite because it has what I describe as that punchline ending. It doesn't have to be a gimmicky ending, like a kind of a gotcha twist or anything, but this has a little element of that. So it starts off with some imagery that has to do with South American jungles and ayahuasca trips and spirit animals. So it has kind of that spirit journey feel, a mystic vision feel to it, which I love Yeats. So anything that kind of gets into that part dream, part reality and mythology, I'm always crazy about that. And then it ends and you kind of zoom out and you realize we're probably talking about some insects and plants that are being consumed by insecticides. So I like that little twist. There's not quite a gotcha moment, but there's different levels, right? You've got some Mayan mythology happening. You've got some really nice language. And you've also got the ayahuasca spirit journey elements. And then it kind of ends with what I would think of as kind of a traditional environmental message. It's sort of a traditional feeling or sentiment of think of the Amazon and its complexity and save the rainforests, but the way it gets there is so luscious and has the different layers of mythology that I appreciated that very much. And one question, let me actually ask you, both of you, this, with the MFA voice in mind, do you sense that there's a point with poetry, like current poetry, meaning the last 20 years, where there is, almost like in jazz, a point of esoterica, where you feel like the poet's only writing to show off how good they are to other poets? Does that sound familiar? He asked nervously.
Adrienne, you're probably closer to the fine art or MFA or BFA experience than we are. So do you have an initial reaction to that?
I mean, I think it's true that there's something that I haven't actually gone through an MFA yet, but in my creative writing, like bachelor's degree, did a lot of reading of just like recent anthologies, things that are coming out from more recent poets, and I think there is like a certain style that I've noticed, or like certain themes that people tend to pick up intertextually, stuff like that. And I think that sometimes writing can become really inaccessible if you're trying just to write for the sake of impressing other authors. And that is something that I like am curious about as more people go through these higher level programs to kind of break into the field. You have to do that in order to like get published and get credited and all this stuff. And I do worry sometimes that it could like make what's being talked about smaller, because it's harder to like hear different voices or perspectives that maybe aren't coming out of academia. And so I definitely think that is true. And I think I find that authors who are writing between cultures avoid that problem, because there's new, like, almost non-Western perspectives coming in, or sometimes people who are writing across languages are really, really interesting. One of the most recent Yale young poets that was like got a whole anthology published. It was like going back and forth between English and Spanish, and experiences in America and Latin America. And I think those pieces do tend to be really interesting because they're breaking a certain pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe there's like a certain expectation. I guess, I mean, the one thing that came to mind first was not necessarily like a stylistic, but somebody kind of phrased it, or it might be more common than I realized, but phrased it as like a page poem. So something that like fits nicely on a page, as opposed, I guess it's, a certain shorter in length, and not, something that's going to take up too much room when you have to kind of work into a publication that is going to be limited. So I guess that kind of awareness, it's a kind of awareness beyond just the subject matter. But yeah, that struck me when that person said that, just because it was kind of so obvious, but not something I really had thought of before. Like, oh, I usually if I write something, it's usually shorter, but I wasn't thinking of it in terms of like, oh, this has got to fit on like one single, 8.5 by 5.5 page. Is that what you were thinking, Chris? What did that? Were those answers?
Oh, that's great.
They kind of hit what you were thinking.
It must be said that I'm talking about this with some bitterness 15 years after kind of putting a year or two in, really trying to get published. And I think to this point, the most money I've ever made with a poem that was published was I made $25 publishing a poem called Clown Coitus in Christchurch, New Zealand. That was kind of like the last kind of success, quote unquote. And so after that, I got more into fiction, and I've got half of a really pulpy novel sitting rotting in a corner that I haven't touched for 3 months, even though we're locked at home. And so I'm totally removed from the academic side of what's recent, or the current trends in either what's likely to get published, what's coming out of the universities, and it could be only jealousy and bitterness talking, but the MFA voice sounds suspiciously uniform until you start breaking out of just the Western culture, or you're from another country, or you're from a different background. I think the other one that I really liked was from an engineer in Texas somewhere, who had no formal training in creative writing, and attempting to hypothesize that the university system is kind of crafting one rivulet, but then you're interested in what else is out there.
Yeah, that could very well be. I think my approach when I read poetry is probably a little less from that place of like the creative writing program, and I do tend to like things that are a little bit unorthodox, not necessarily like esoteric, like you mentioned, or like avant-garde. That could be interesting, or maybe it could go a little bit too far, obviously, but something that kind of just strikes you as, oh, this is almost like you just said, like, oh, this was written by a real person, as opposed to, I had to crank out 5 poems in a week, or however those programs work. So yeah, that was kind of that's a good insight, because yeah, hopefully there are a bunch of those poems that we do publish that are kind of seem a little bit, I was going to say a little bit off, but that sounds a little negative, but like just a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, I think this A Deluge by Any Other Name is interesting, because it's as you said, like at the end it kind of comes to this punchline. It has like a message almost, but it's not like so on the nose about it. You kind of have to get there on your own and be like open to hearing that. And I think a lot of poetry like stems from like oral tradition and storytelling. You're trying to learn something or teach something way back when, but like do it in a way that's engaging for your audience, no matter where they're coming from. And I think that sometimes it might not even so much be like the university aspect as like this feeling like this has to be publishable, it has to appeal, it has to do this and this in order to get on the page. And I think maybe people who are like speaking to an experience or a story that they just really feel has to be told don't run into that problem as much.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think the next piece you were going to talk about is visual art. And so, Aaron, you used the term avant-garde. So we have a 3-point trident. Anytime I'm thinking about music, I have a similar line of thought where, particularly with jazz, the more complex it gets, the harder it is to tell if it's really good, like borderline genius level, or if it's just BS, people kind of being esoteric for esoteric's sake. And it's kind of that struggling, right? Accessibility, but also maximum quality and sophistication. And the sweet spot on the graph is if you can pull people in who might think they hate poetry or think they hate jazz. But I think Vince Guaraldi for me is the sweet spot in terms of jazz, because most people like the Peanuts theme and those kind of really gentle, accessible pieces. But if you listen to them, they're pretty sophisticated jazz. And so, as a struggling jazz pianist and as a struggling writer, I'm always kind of wondering where to try to, how high to aim, so that I'm not just trying to impress other people, but also trying to challenge myself and get outside of my own comfort zone.
Right. That's the balancing act. Yeah. Hopefully the piece I have in mind, and I sent it to both of you, kind of plays into this a little bit. It's from Leilaj Curie, and it's titled Shore. And I picked this one for a lot of reasons, actually. But it's a great example of something that is visual and also textual. And that was really when I started this idea, the Wild Roof Journal. That was kind of one of the seeds that got me going, is to combine these two worlds. So this one does it in a really compact, really economical, visually appealing. I really like this piece. And again, I'll put this one on the website so people can see it visually. But it's set up as a postcard, and the image that we get is both sides of the postcard. And the first side is like a collage of like a shoreline, and it's something that strikes me as it's a very familiar image. I love being by the water, so it's something it's just an image that I love, and that it strikes me as something I like without even thinking too much about it. But it's stylized because it has these kind of odd different collage elements to it to make it kind of appear like waves, but it's a little bit unfamiliar as well. And then the back side of the postcard has a poem. And the more I read the poem, it's very short, but there's something about it that I almost can't explain. It strikes me as something that I feel, even though it's so sparse and like a little bit unusual. But there's kind of those hallmark images that I kind of have in my head, I guess. So the text. Oh, and the artist mentioned that she did design the stamp as well.
Oh,
so that was kind of a cool thing.
Yeah.
But the poem itself struck me as like a change in the seasons, like ending summer, which is my favorite season, and going into fall, which is my least favorite season. So it struck me as this time on the shore when it's not quite summer, but you kind of have to keep moving forward. So that hits me at an emotional level, I guess, just in that spot. And the final 3 lines, I walk here, I walk here, I walk here, just kind of make me feel like that moment on the shore.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, what did you think about it?
I'll admit I didn't do my homework on that one, so I didn't find it. So apologies. I'll have to sit in the dunce corner for this one.
I this was actually a piece that I read and looked at when I was first applying to read for Wild Roof. Like I just happened upon this when I was trying to like learn more about the journal and what kind of stuff is published. And I really, really liked this piece and it stuck with me. I am a big fan of like artifact fiction, by which I mean like things that are made to look like other things. So like fiction in the form of a postcard really strikes my fancy. But I think that the poem itself, it does have this sort of like almost melancholy feeling. And it all, and the descriptions that are used are interesting to me. Like the sand is crushed gray taffeta. I would never think to describe sand as taffeta, and to be honest, I don't totally understand what it means, but like I have a feeling and I like it. And I also enjoyed the I walk here, I walk here, I walk here. It feels like, I don't know, it gives me the sense of like this being a place that the narrator is familiar with, and I don't know if it's like that they walk here because they like it and this is their home and they just keep going there every day, or if it's like a monotony and they're tired and they're trying to walk beyond it but they can't get there. And I think that little repetition at the end fit really well with a piece that was kind of more ambiguous.
Yeah. So yeah, you mentioned a couple of things. On the melancholy, I guess that's the word I was maybe searching for, which I definitely it comes across even in such a limited amount of text. And yeah, describing the sand as gray taffeta, which is like a soft fabric. Yeah, it's gray, and if you're on a beach and it's sunny and it's July, you wouldn't describe this because the sand is gray usually. I guess. Oh, in these parts, I guess. Maybe in other places you have different colored sand, but yeah, it kind of adds to that pathos. And then the repetition at the end struck me. I didn't even think of another reading actually. It struck me as belonging. But yeah, you're right. It could mean a lot of different things. But I guess that's why in my response, it just felt me like I belong here.
Yeah.
And even though things are moving on as far as even the literal reading of the seasons, or obviously a more emotional reading, this is where you belong, I guess, or where the speaker belongs.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the first time I read it, that was the reading I came away with. And I think that maybe because of like the third stanza where it says like the gray taffeta thing and bleakness shimmers, the sky is lustrous as a worm. I was like, that's so weird and fun, but I thought that it was kind of trying to project like magic into like a maybe dreary or bleak space. So that does, I think, imply that the narrators likes it there.
Yeah, and again, this is part of our discussion. We're taking liberties a little bit and kind of extrapolating what we might be reading into the text. So,
I mean, I'm also just biased because I like the beach.
Okay, yeah, so I'm on board with that. And the other thing, I just love the compactness of it. Like you mentioned, it's kind of the ephemera of a postcard. It's just a cool concept to me. So yeah, I'm kind of on board with that element of it where it is a poem, it is a collage, but it's also this practical thing that stands apart from those other pieces of art. So yeah, and then I guess we'll move on. Adrienne, you get another selection.
Yeah, my other one was mostly a visual art piece. It's Garden Study by Todd Bartell, which is in Gallery 3 of issue 5. And it was just a really interesting, I didn't pick one particular image out of it. It's a series of 3. And I kind of looked at all of them because I felt like they were building on a story almost. And I wanted to know what it was. So I was just looking really closely. And the more I looked, like it just caught my eye, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to say this one because it looks pretty and I'll be excited to keep looking at it. But then when I kept looking at it, I found new things every time. And that was really exciting because it's kind of a collage piece, but it's also like a little puzzle. And all of it is done over pages of the Metamorphoses by Ovid, which is something I studied and enjoyed. So that was exciting for me. And I was trying to like look at the line numbers and find it in my book and be like, what myth is this? But I think that this does kind of a similar thing to what I liked in the other piece I spoke about, which is that it's playing on like old mythologies, but then just bringing in a modern viewpoint of like the nature, things growing out of it. And it's no longer just this Western mythos, because the artist has included different languages and different spaces. You have Hebrew on the first page, and the last one is titled Wak Wak Tree, which I Googled, and that is like from Arabic mythology. And that was super cool, and taught me something. So I learned a lot from these, which was cool.
Sure. And yeah, there are many more in this series. And I was going back and forth with this artist. He had sent maybe 10 or 15 images of images in this series, and that maybe they are on his website as well. So I'll link that. But yeah, they're all these layered, part painting on top of these pages of, like you mentioned, Metamorphoses. And they all have to do with some kind of mythology. And you mentioned a couple. So I found it interesting that a lot of the pieces we talked about have some kind of mythic element to them. So maybe that's a theme I didn't realize was there.
Yeah, I mean, I think like something that struck me in talking about all of these pieces is like the idea of sort of like mythologies growing as people do, and like the cultures and societies. And I think like it's almost, I mean, a lot of Wild Roof's work that's published plays with nature and humanity and how they go together. And I think that mythologies and religions and different things growing out of cultures kind of grow like nature. And I don't know if that entirely makes sense outside of my brain, but that was something that I liked about all of these pieces.
Right. Well, exactly too. Yeah, there's a natural element in at least the three that I included. One is a volcano. One is a sun underground sun, and the third one is the Wak Wak Tree. So yeah, there are these elements of culture, which is the mythologies, and then the elements of nature, which is kind of brought into the culture. So, and I've been going with the text underneath it. It's very like one of the reasons I liked it was just the layering of it, and they're very kind of messy constructions. Like when you look at them visually, like you said, there's so much to see. Just the surface, you kind of get one image of it, but you can kind of even zoom in to different pieces. The text that's kind of covered up with paint in this area. Yeah. That area, you kind of see words and phrases coming through. But yeah, you can have kind of a lot of fun with those because you can really look at them through a couple different go-arounds and get something different out of it each time.
Yeah. And I think kind of like in the piece Chris spoke about, kind of ended with this idea of like science meeting nature and the pesticides and the insects. And one thing I liked about this is like the last page, the Wak Wak Tree, has some scientific elements too. Like he's literally playing with the periodic table and then like showing how it grows this mythical tree, which supposedly sprouts people. And I don't know, I think it's really interesting when authors and artists can make like sort of STEM fields and just stories come together so well. I think that's really exciting.
Right. And the other one had at the bottom right corner the periodic square for gold.
Oh, cool. I didn't even see that.
Which is the sun. Or the one with the sun on it, the underground sun. Yeah, I think the other one that I selected that is another visual piece was Catherine LeCompte's Mad Girl's Love Song. This one I picked again because it was this intersection of text and visual art. And the author noted that the title Mad Girl's Love Song comes from the Sylvia Plath poem by the same name. And again, this was a series. There's 3 on the website that are from this photography series. But this is another one that was just visually striking, first of all, and then plays again with the shore element and the water element that I was talking a little bit about with the piece called Shore a little bit ago. The one thing I liked about it is I like a lot of these very unusual or experimental portraits. Just the one picture is just a portrait of a girl's face with her eyes closed, and it seems to be as you scroll the other images, there's the water imagery. So the background isn't quite clear, but it's kind of seaweed and water, and I just kind of like the colors and just the way the green. Even there's like green in the face, like in the eyes. You get kind of the kind of flows from the green on the one side of the page to the red of the other side of the page. Yeah, it was just something that kind of struck me as this kind of using an established poem to kind of play off of in a different medium. And I did refresh my memory a bit with the poem itself, the Sylvia Plath poem. The first 2 lines relate, I feel, to the portrait. The first 2 lines of the poem: I shut my eyes and the world drops dead. I lift my lids, all is born again. That one I thought was interesting too. And then the other 2 pictures that I included, one was the hand over the water in the background, and then the feet at the water's edge. So I kind of felt that liminality. I kind of liked that aspect of those three pictures.
They're very striking. Like it's really interesting how like just the hand with sort of shell fragments on it is, I think, the one that catches me the most, and it's almost the most straightforward. I don't totally know what about it draws me in, but I'm like, ooh. But I think maybe just because the initial portrait, she has seaweed, it looks like, around her neck almost. And the last one with her feet in the water is a little darker and like playing with like reds and shadows. And I guess the middle one feels different because it feels almost hopeful, like she's just like looking out at the water, and the first one made me think she was like dead. And I'm just curious what the story of this girl in the portrait is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, there is that kind of curious narrative, and like I said, there are more to the series. So yeah, is it the Crimson Dulce? I think that's the isn't that like a red type of seaweed? I could be wrong about that. In the picture with the feet. But yeah, the hand, for some, it's such a simple image, but yeah, for me that one it's really engaging too, because there's shell fragments and like wet sand that's kind of held up by this hand over this blurry blue background. And for some reason, yeah, I guess you kind of just ask questions about it as far as maybe piecing together that narrative. Did anybody else have another piece? I know I had one more that I just wanted to throw out there.
No one specific piece, but this might be better as a closer. But just the last poem that kind of surprised you, or the way I like to think of it is, I didn't realize how far out of this until you sent me this, and I started going through poetry, and I'm like, oh, there's an entire part of my brain waking up. And I realized the last time a poem snuck up and kind of like hit me in the back of the head, like, wow. So if all 3 of us could share one of those, the last time a poem just really surprised you or snuck up and hit you in the back of the head with a baseball bat.
I'll have to think about that. Yeah, file that one away for a minute.
Roger that.
But yeah, that would be. Do you have one, Chris, that you'll be sharing?
The reason I thought of it is I was ashamed when I was going through these poems in this publication that it's been over a year, because it was when W.S. Merwin died, and NPR was doing a remembrance. And I never had a really strong opinion of W.S. Merwin. I knew he was passable and enjoyable, and took a lot of classes where he'd be one or two. You'd only get one or two poems of his, and never really struck me. But he was dead, and I was at a point in my life where the poem, I think it's called A Single Autumn, was just way too creepily on point. It's about somebody whose parents are both dead now, and he's going through the house, and there's all the ghosts and the memories. And the final line, I can't remember the lead up, but the final line is something, he's kind of looking at the emptiness of the house after it's been cleaned out and all the memories and ghosts are gone. And then he says, and I could do anything. It was one of those punchline, like a gut punch ending that is kind of mysterious. It's you kind of sense a little creepy guilt associated with the new freedom, but also all of the law. The rest of the poem is just a very thoughtful meditation on loss and passing and the life cycle. And yeah, I just remember I was driving my car somewhere in inner city Buffalo, and I just had to pull over, I need a breath. And so yeah, the poem just snuck up on me out of nowhere, and I had to teach him the next day. I just took everything else off the lesson plan. I was like, all right, today's W.S. Merwin Day.
Nice. Yeah,
Cool.
I'll have to look that one up as well. I feel like you mentioned him before, and I did like what I read, but I didn't get too far into it. So yeah, to answer that question, the last piece that I was toying with as I was making some selections, I think actually does fit the bill, because it was published in our first issue, which was back in March, and I keep going back to it, and it's just something that I even read it again today several times, and I just kind of had the same reaction as I normally do when I look at it. So it was from issue 1. The poet was Samantha Malay, or Malay, Malay, and there's 2 poems in particular. One was called Geography of Doubt, and one was called Property. Again, it's a little bit tough to describe what you like about him in that subjective way, but these 2 poems especially, they're just very feet on the ground kind of poems. They play with at least partially autobiographical childhood memories and some of the imagery. And again, I got a little bit behind the scenes, because I contacted the writer and asked a few questions, and we went back and forth a couple of times. So I guess not to bring too much of the behind the scenes in, but yeah, there were some autobiographical elements of her childhood that she brought into it. Yeah, just very I guess hands in the dirt. It just makes me feel that sense of place that she's speaking about. It's so tangible in these couple of poems. Yeah, I guess there's an underdog element to it, that you just kind of feel like you're almost rooting for the speaker and the characters, I guess you could call them, in the poem. And there's great rhythm. It's, again, very easily readable. It just comes out very naturally as far as the language, and just has this great rhythm. The one line, the line near the end of Geography of Doubt. There were lean years even when we cut enough firewood and brought in the hay before the rain. I love that idea. Even if we do everything right, it's still a struggle. It's still tough. And for a long time, we believed our gamble would bind us together. So again, it kind of has that element of there's more to the story. A long time we believed that, and then presumably we stopped believing that at some point. So it just kind of, you get this surface level of the story, and you just feel like there's more and more beyond it. So that was just an intriguing one, and like I said, the one that struck me from the beginning, and Property kind of used that same setting. Another poem used that same setting for another of her pieces.
I think these poems have like you were saying, they leave questions, and you have curiosity, which is a good thing to leave a reader with, I think. But it's also so grounded in detail. I don't feel like the questions are overwhelming, because I have such a strong sense of place that I don't mind not knowing everything, and that's really, really cool.
Right. And actually, the writer had another version of it might have been Properties, one of these two poems that was cut down. It was a lot more sparse. And I think what you just said reminded me of that because like you get so much, even though it's a short poem, you get this tangible detail. And the sparse version, I think, lost a little bit. You know, if you maybe had that imagery in your head already, you kind of get it, but you kind of lost a little bit just entering in this world. I like the fuller version. So do you remember? Do you have an answer to Chris's question? Do you remember a poem that made you step
Yeah.
back for a bit?
Yeah, there was a poem. I did some Googling to remember the title. There was a poem that I read. It was kind of early in quarantine. So I actually graduated this past spring. And so I got kicked off campus because coronavirus and no graduation and life just slips out from under me. No plan, no job market. And I was just so freaked out. And everyone was freaked out. And I think this is true of like no matter what stage you're at in your life, it was a confusing time, and it still is. And I just like happened to stumble across this poem on Instagram that someone had published in their story, and I just clicked through. I was like, okay, I'll read. I haven't read in a while. I've been too sad to find anything for myself, so I'm just gonna read what my friends tell me to. And it was called "What Carries Us" by Emily Jungmin Yoon. And I like this. It stuck with me, and I thought it was really interesting because it's a poem. In my reading, at least, it's a poem about a long distance relationship, basically, in the modern age, and just like flying back and forth to see someone that you care about. But it's tying in with this idea of like, again, the natural world and like what used to carry us places, like horses and our own 2 feet, and how we got around and what we cared about. And I guess I thought it stuck with me because I think I had this feeling of like my problems, like, sure, like they're my problems, but who cares? Like, there's worse things. Okay, I miss my boyfriend, but whatever. But this poem almost gave me a space to feel like something that's just common nowadays can have a lot of emotion behind it, and it's okay to feel strongly about something even if you feel like you're being a cliche. And I just kept thinking about it because it just made me feel like I had space to process my own emotions in a kind of beautiful way and connect them to bigger things rather than trying to minimize myself and be like, no, you're just a little girl. It just gave me the space to be like, oh yeah, I can connect my experiences to literature or to history or to whatever I want. And if that's how I want to process, that's okay. And I can write a poem about something, even if I think it's silly and romantic or whatever. And that was why it stuck with me. And I've gone back to it a few times.
Nice. Well, thanks for that question, Chris. That was a good one. Yeah, we're nearing an hour actually, so we'll wrap things up. Yeah. So this was. Oh, go ahead.
Before you conclude, are you going to edit this at all, or will it just be one continuous piece? Because I was wondering if we should go around and do introductions and kind of say who we are, what our backgrounds are, and if you were to stitch that to the beginning. But if there's no editing, I would understand.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. So yeah, I could pull that from the end and put it at the beginning. So yeah, we'll do our introductions. And the other thing I was going to say too is as just kind of as a bit of a reflection back on the poems we selected. These were some of many, a few of many.
Oh, yeah.
It's really the process here was nothing more than a subjective. This is what struck me, what I liked, what I had an emotional response to. So it was more to kind of celebrate these couple of pieces and some of the creative spirit behind them that appeared in the journal. Yeah, having said that, we'll do some introductions, and if you're listening to this, you'll be hearing this part at the beginning. Yeah, this was great. Thank you both for joining me on a little bit of short notice as I was trying to organize this.
thank you for giving me the opportunity to participate and to talk with you guys, because this is really, really cool for me. Like I feel so validated as a young person entering the field to be included in this. So thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it was an idea I've had for a while, just to get in more into the discussion. And yeah, it's what a refreshing thing, right? I mean, we used to do this all the time as teachers.
Amen to that.
All the time, and you kind of lose a lot of that element, obviously, with doing classes remote and stuff like that. So yeah, we'll talk to you again later.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. This was so fun.